Black man's last wish before execution to see his cat, but what happened changed everything. The fluorescent lights hummed like angry wasps above the visiting room at Riverside Correctional Facility. Elijah Brooks sat perfectly still, his weathered hands folded on the metal table, waiting for what might be his last conversation with the outside world. At 52, 15 years behind bars had carved deep lines around his eyes, but they still held a gentleness that seemed impossible for a man condemned to die. Warden Patricia Mills entered with a clipboard, her expression unreadable. She had presided over 11 executions during her tenure, and each one weighed heavier than the last. But this case felt different. Something about Elijah's unwavering calm, his consistent story, and the way even the hardest guards spoke of him with quiet respect made her stomach churn. "Mr. Brooks," she began, settling into the chair across from him. "The state has granted you the opportunity to make a final request, within reason. Most inmates ask to see family members, clergy, or request a specific meal." Elijah nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on a water stain on the concrete wall. "I understand, ma'am. What would you like?" The words came out barely above a whisper. "I want to see my cat." Warden Mills blinked, certain she had misheard. "I'm sorry?" "My cat, Cinnamon. She's all I got left in this world." Elijah's voice cracked slightly. "Been staying with my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, since I got locked up. That old tabby, she's probably 16 now. Don't know how much time she's got left either." The warden stared at him for a long moment. In 15 years of corrections work, she had never received such a request. "Mr. Brooks, you do understand that your execution is scheduled for Monday evening? That's 4 days from now." "Yes, ma'am. I know exactly how much time I got left." "And you want to spend your final visit with a cat?" Elijah finally met her eyes, and she saw something there that made her chest tighten. Not desperation or madness, but a profound loneliness mixed with genuine love. "Warden Mills, I've been in this cage for 15 years for something I didn't do. Lost my mama, lost my job, lost everything. But before all this happened, when I was working at Rodriguez Auto Shop, fixing cars and trying to make an honest living, I found this little tabby kitten half dead in a dumpster behind the shop. Nursed her back to health, fed her from a bottle like she was my own child." He paused, swallowing hard. "That cat was the only thing that made coming home worth it. Only thing that ever looked at me like I mattered. Now they gonna finish me, and I ain't never gonna see her again. I just want to hold her one more time. Tell her I'm sorry I couldn't come home." The warden felt her professional composure slipping. She had read Elijah's file cover to cover. The evidence against him was circumstantial at best. He had been in the area during a robbery, had no solid alibi, and a witness claimed to have seen someone matching his description. But something about the case had always felt off to her. "Mr. Brooks, this is highly irregular. We've never allowed pets in the visitation area, especially not for condemned inmates. I know it's strange, ma'am. But if I gotta die, I want my last memory to be something pure. Something that reminded me what love felt like before all this went wrong." 3 hours later, the story broke on every major news network in the state. Death row inmate's final wish, to see his cat, ran across the bottom of television screens from morning talk shows to evening news broadcasts. Social media exploded with debates about the request, some calling it ridiculous, others deeply moved by the humanity of it. 1,500 miles away, in a glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor of Hale Technologies in downtown Seattle, billionaire CEO Desmond Hale was only half listening to quarterly projections when the news segment began playing on the office television. His head of operations was droning on about server capacity when something on the screen made Desmond's blood freeze. The camera had zoomed in on a photograph, a tired-looking black man with kind eyes holding an old tabby cat with distinctive markings, cream-colored fur with cinnamon stripes across the face, and a white patch shaped like a crescent moon on the forehead. Desmond's coffee mug slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor. His executives turned to stare, but he couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. He knew that cat. Had dreamed about that cat for 27 years. "Sir?" Mr. Hale, are you alright? His assistant's voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. But Desmond was no longer in the boardroom. He was 8 years old again, hiding under his bed in the middle of the night, listening to his parents scream as someone ransacked their house downstairs. He remembered the weight of terror in his small chest, the way his hands shook as he clutched his toy robot. And he remembered the tabby cat that had somehow gotten into the house during the chaos. The same cat now staring back at him from the television screen. The cat that had saved his life. "Cancel the meeting," Desmond whispered, his voice hoarse. "Cancel everything." As his confused executives filed out, Desmond remained transfixed by the screen. The news had moved on to other stories, but he couldn't shake the image of that man, Elijah Brooks, holding the cat that had changed everything for a terrified little boy so many years ago. He reached for his phone with trembling fingers. If that was the same cat, if somehow after all these years fate had brought them back together, then maybe the man about to die for finishing wasn't a criminal at all. Maybe he was about to let them execute a hero. Desmond's penthouse apartment overlooked the Seattle skyline, but tonight he saw none of it. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand, transported back to a nightmare he had spent decades trying to forget. The Hale family had lived modestly then, in a 2-story house in Cleveland's working-class neighborhood. His father ran a small accounting firm, his mother taught elementary school. They weren't wealthy, but they were happy. 8-year-old Desmond collected comic books and dreamed of becoming a superhero who could protect everyone. That dream died on October 15, 1998. Desmond closed his eyes and let the memory wash over him, clearer now than it had been in years. He had awakened to the sound of splintering wood downstairs, followed by his mother's terrified scream. From the top of the stairs, he could see shadowy figures moving through their living room, overturning furniture, smashing picture frames. "Where is it?" a man's voice had growled. "Your husband's been skimming money from the Torino family. We know he's got our cash hidden somewhere. Please," his mother had sobbed. "We don't know what you're talking about. David runs a small accounting firm. We don't have any money." Young Desmond had crept back to his room and hidden under the bed, clutching his stuffed dinosaur as the sounds of destruction continued below. But then he heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy boots climbing toward the bedrooms. Toward him. The bedroom door had creaked open, and Desmond held his breath as those boots stepped into view. The intruder was looking for hiding places, checking closets, moving closer to the bed. Desmond's heart hammered so loud he was certain the man would hear it. Then, impossibly, a cat appeared. A skinny tabby with cinnamon stripes and a distinctive white crescent on her forehead had somehow slipped into the chaos. She rubbed against the intruder's legs, purring loudly, demanding attention. The man cursed and tried to shoo her away, but the cat persisted, weaving between his feet. "Damn stray," the man muttered, stumbling slightly as the cat continued her determined affection campaign. That momentary distraction gave 8-year-old Desmond the chance he needed. While the intruder was off balance, kicking at the persistent cat, Desmond scrambled from under the bed and bolted for the window. His small fingers fumbled with the latch as he heard the man curse behind him. "Hey! Kid!" But Desmond was already climbing out onto the roof, screaming for help at the top of his lungs. "Help! Help! Someone's in our house!" Lights began flickering on in neighboring homes. The intruders below heard the commotion and fled, but not before Desmond heard one of them shout something that had haunted him ever since. "The kid saw us. We'll have to take care of this later." The police arrived within minutes, but the attackers were gone. Desmond's parents were shaken but alive. His father insisted he had no idea what the men were talking about. He didn't work for any crime family, didn't have anyone's money. The police believed him, but warned the family that they might not be safe. By Christmas, the Hales had quietly relocated to Seattle, where David started over with a new accounting practice. They never spoke of that night again, but Desmond never forgot the little tabby cat who had saved his life. He had looked for her after the police left, but she had vanished as mysteriously as she had appeared. Now, 27 years later, that same cat was staring back at him from a television screen, cradled in the arms of a man about to be executed for finishing. Desmond pulled out his phone and called his head of security, Marcus Webb, a former FBI agent who handled sensitive investigations for Hale Technologies. "Marcus, I need you to do something unusual for me, and I need you to do it quietly." "What do you need, Mr. Hale?" "There's a man on death row in Louisiana named Elijah Brooks. I want you to get me everything: his case file, police reports, witness statements, everything. And I want it by morning." "Sir, that's going to require calling in some serious favors. May I ask why you're interested in a death row case in Louisiana?" Desmond watched his reflection in the window, seeing the frightened 8-year-old boy he used to be superimposed over the billionaire he had become. "Because that man owns the cat that saved my life. And if she chose him, if she's been with him all these years, then maybe we're about to execute the wrong person." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I'll make some calls." After hanging up, Desmond realized his hands were shaking. He had built an empire, commanded boardrooms, negotiated billion-dollar deals. But the thought of that gentle-eyed man dying while the real criminals from his childhood remained free made him feel 8 years old again. This time, though, he wasn't hiding under a bed. This time, he had the power to fight back. Marcus Webb arrived at Desmond's office at 6 a.m. with 3 thick manila folders and a grim expression. The former FBI agent had spent all night calling in favors from contacts in Louisiana law enforcement, and what he had uncovered made his stomach turn. "Sir, you're not going to like what I found," Marcus said, spreading the files across Desmond's desk. "The case against Elijah Brooks is shakier than a house of cards in a hurricane." Desmond poured 2 cups of coffee and settled in to listen. Outside, Seattle was waking up, but his attention was entirely focused on the tragedy unfolding in these documents. 15 years ago, a pawnshop owner named Vincent Castellano was robbed and finished in New Orleans. Elijah Brooks was arrested 3 weeks later based on the testimony of a single witness, a drug addict named Tommy Guidry, who claimed he saw Brooks leaving the scene. Marcus pulled out a photograph of the crime scene. "Here's where it gets interesting. The investigating detective was a guy named Ray Mouton. Mouton retired 6 months after the conviction with a new house in Florida and a boat he definitely couldn't afford on a cop's salary. You think he was bought? I think the whole thing stinks. Look at this." Marcus opened another file. The witness, Tommy Guidry, recanted his testimony 2 years later. Said he was high when it happened and wasn't even in the neighborhood. But somehow his recantation never made it into the appeals process. Desmond studied the crime scene photos, his jaw tightening. "What about physical evidence?" "That's the beautiful part. There was DNA under the victim's fingernails, but it was never tested against Brooks. The prosecution claimed his confession made testing unnecessary." "His confession?" Marcus pulled out a transcript. 12 hours of interrogation without a lawyer present. Brooks maintained his innocence for 8 hours, then suddenly confessed. The confession is suspicious. It reads like someone fed him details. Desmond was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. "You said there was DNA. What happened to it?" "That's where it gets really interesting. I found the original crime scene investigator, a guy named Paul Thibodeau. He's retired now, living in Baton Rouge. I called him last night." Marcus leaned forward. He remembers the case clearly because something about it bothered him. He personally collected that DNA evidence and handed it over to the lab, but somehow it never got processed. "Someone intercepted it?" "Thibodeau thinks so. He said Detective Mouton told him the evidence wasn't needed anymore because they had their man. But Thibodeau kept detailed notes, and according to his records, there was enough genetic material for a full profile." Desmond stood and began pacing. "Tell me about Vincent Castellano. Who was he really?" Marcus smiled grimly. "Now we're getting to the good stuff. Officially, Castellano ran a legitimate pawnshop. Unofficially, he was a fence for stolen goods and a loan shark with connections to organized crime. The kind of guy who made enemies. The kind of guy who might cross the wrong people?" "Exactly. And here's the kicker, 3 days before he was finished, Castellano had a very public argument with a developer named Frank Torino Jr. Desmond's blood went cold. Torino? You know the name? Keep talking. Frank Torino Jr. was the son of Vincent Big Vinny Torino, who ran most of the organized crime in the Gulf Coast region back in the day. Jr. was trying to go legitimate, had a construction company. But 6 months after Castellano's finishing, Jr. disappeared. Never found the body. The pieces were starting to fit together in Desmond's mind, painting a picture that made him nauseous. His father's accounting firm. The home invasion. The accusations about missing money. The Torino family name. Meanwhile, 1,200 miles away, Cinnamon was making her own journey. Mrs. Rodriguez, a 70-year-old woman with arthritis and a fierce loyalty to her former employee, had driven 8 hours through the night to bring the old tabby cat to Riverside Correctional Facility. "I don't understand why they're doing this to Elijah," she told Warden Mills as they prepared Cinnamon for the visit. "That boy never hurt nobody. Worked hard, paid his rent on time, always helped me with my groceries. And the way he loved this cat." She stroked Cinnamon's fur gently. "Animals know, you understand? They know when someone's got a bad heart. This cat never would have stayed with someone who could hurt people." Cinnamon, now 16 and moving slowly but still alert, seemed to sense something important was happening. Her golden eyes were bright as she was carried through the prison corridors in a special carrier approved by the warden. In the visiting room, Elijah sat waiting, his hands trembling slightly. When the door opened and he saw the carrier, tears began streaming down his face before he even saw his beloved companion. "Cinnamon? That you, girl?" The moment the carrier door opened, the old cat stepped out and walked directly to Elijah, as if no time had passed at all. She jumped onto his lap with surprising agility and began purring, a deep rumbling sound that filled the sterile room with something approaching joy. "I'm so sorry I couldn't come home," Elijah whispered, stroking her fur with gentle hands. "I tried to fight it, baby girl. I tried to prove I didn't do what they said. But sometimes the truth ain't enough." Watching through the observation window, Warden Mills felt tears in her own eyes. Whatever else was true about Elijah Brooks, this moment was real. This love was genuine. And somewhere in Seattle, a billionaire was about to turn the justice system upside down to save them both. Paul Thibodeau lived in a modest ranch house on the outskirts of Baton Rouge, surrounded by fishing trophies and memories of 30 years in crime scene investigation. When Marcus Webb knocked on his door at 9 p.m., the 68-year-old retiree was expecting him. "You're the one who called about the Castellano case," Thibodeau said, inviting Marcus inside. "That case has haunted me for 15 years. I knew something wasn't right." Marcus settled into a worn recliner, while Thibodeau poured 2 glasses of sweet tea. "Tell me what you remember about that night." "Everything," Thibodeau said without hesitation. "Vincent Castellano was beaten to death with a tire iron. Brutal attack, but the finisher made mistakes. There was skin under Castellano's fingernails, good DNA samples. Blood spatter patterns suggested the finisher was left-handed and about 5'10". Elijah Brooks was right-handed and 6'2". But you collected the evidence anyway?" "Damn right I did. That's my job. I bagged those nail clippings personally, labeled them, and handed them directly to Detective Mouton. Never saw them again." Thibodeau walked to a filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. "I kept copies of everything. Call it professional paranoia, but something about Mouton rubbed me wrong from day one." Marcus examined the crime scene photos and evidence logs. The attention to detail was meticulous. "What happened to the original evidence?" "Mouton claimed it got contaminated at the lab. Said they couldn't use it. But I called the lab myself. They never received those samples. Someone intercepted them before they ever got tested." "Who had that kind of authority?" Thibodeau's expression darkened. "That's where it gets interesting. 3 days after I handed over the evidence, I got a visit from Detective Ray Mouton and his new partner, a guy named Anthony Torino." Marcus nearly dropped his tea glass. "Torino? As in the crime family?" Vincent Torino's nephew. Just got transferred to the precinct from Internal Affairs. Convenient, right? Thibodeau pulled out another document. Anthony Torino was the one who processed Elijah's confession. 12 hours in that room, and somehow a man with no prior record suddenly admits to a brutal crime he clearly didn't commit. Meanwhile, back at Riverside Correctional Facility, Elijah was experiencing the most peace he had felt in 15 years. Cinnamon had curled up in his lap, purring contentedly as he gently stroked her aging fur. The 10-minute visit had been extended to an hour at the warden's discretion. Even the hardest guards seemed moved by the reunion. "You got old on me, girl," Elijah whispered, scratching behind her ears in the spot that always made her purr louder. "But you're still my beautiful Cinnamon." The cat looked up at him with those familiar golden eyes, as if trying to communicate something important. She had always been intuitive, seeming to sense his moods before he did. Tonight she seemed restless, occasionally looking toward the door as if expecting someone. "What is it, baby? You sense something I don't?" Cinnamon meowed softly, then did something that made Elijah's heart skip. She walked to the corner of the visiting room and began pawing at the floor, just like she used to do when she found something important in the alley behind Rodriguez Auto Shop. She had once led him to a stray kitten this way, and another time to a wallet that had been dropped by a customer. But tonight there was nothing on the floor but institutional linoleum. Back in Baton Rouge, Thibodeau was revealing the final piece of the puzzle. "There's something else you need to know about that night. About an hour before we got the call about Castellano's finishing, there was another incident. A break-in about 10 miles away." Marcus leaned forward. "What kind of break-in?" "Home invasion. Family named Harrison got hit by 3 men looking for money they claimed the father had stolen. But here's the weird part. The family had moved to Louisiana from Cleveland about 6 months earlier. Father was an accountant who specialized in small business finances." The room seemed to spin around Marcus. "Did you say Cleveland?" "Yeah. Why? That means something to you?" Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed Desmond's number. It was answered on the first ring. "What did you find?" "Mr. Hale, I need you to sit down. Your father's accounting firm. Did he ever work with any businesses connected to the Torino family?" There was a long silence. I don't know. He never talked about his clients. After the break-in, he destroyed all his files before we moved. Said it was too dangerous to keep them. Sir, the night Vincent Castellano was finished, there was another crime. A family named Harrison was attacked in their home by men looking for money they claimed the father had stolen. The Harrisons had just moved from Cleveland." Another silence, longer this time. "Marcus, are you telling me my father was laundering money for the Torino family?" "I'm telling you that someone wanted both your father and Vincent Castellano finished 15 years ago. Your father got away. Castellano didn't. And Elijah Brooks became the convenient scapegoat." Thibodeau, who had been listening to one side of the conversation, suddenly snapped his fingers. "Wait a minute. I just remembered something else. The night of Castellano's finishing, there was a witness who saw someone fleeing the scene. But it wasn't Elijah Brooks. Who was it? A woman walking her dog described a white man, medium build, getting into a dark sedan. But her statement disappeared from the file before the trial. I've got a copy right here." Marcus felt the pieces clicking into place. "Paul, I need you to come to New Orleans with me. Tonight. And bring every document you've got." "What's happening?" "We're about to stop an execution and expose a conspiracy that's been 15 years in the making." As they prepared to leave, either man noticed the black SUV that had been parked across the street for the past hour, or the 2 figures inside who had been listening to every word through high-powered surveillance equipment. Some secrets, once disturbed, have a way of fighting back. The black SUV followed Marcus and Thibodeau for 30 miles before making its move. On a dark stretch of Highway 10, it accelerated and pulled alongside their rental car. Marcus caught a glimpse of the passenger lowering his window before he yanked the steering wheel hard right, tires screaming as they careened onto the shoulder. "Get down!" Marcus shouted, throwing himself across Thibodeau as bullets shattered the rear window. The old crime scene investigator clutched his precious evidence folder to his chest as their car skidded to a stop behind a concrete barrier. The SUV had vanished into the night, but its message was clear: some people would finish to keep the truth buried. "You okay?" Marcus asked, helping Thibodeau to his feet. Blood trickled from a cut on the older man's forehead, but his eyes were blazing with determination. "Those bastards just proved everything we suspected," Thibodeau said, checking that his documents were intact. "They wouldn't risk exposure unless we were getting close to something big." In Seattle, Desmond was assembling the most expensive legal team money could buy. At 2 a.m. on Saturday morning, his conference room looked like a war room. Criminal defense attorneys, forensics experts, and federal prosecutors he had worked with on corporate cases sat around the table, all wondering why one of the country's richest men was obsessed with a death row case in Louisiana. "Gentlemen, ladies," Desmond began, "I'm about to tell you something that will sound impossible. But I have 48 hours to save an innocent man's life, and I need your help." He told them everything: the childhood break-in, the cat, the connections to the Torino family, the suppressed evidence. When he finished, the room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. "Mr. Hale," said Jennifer Walsh, a federal prosecutor, "even if everything you're saying is true, we can't stop an execution without new evidence. Real evidence." "We have it," Desmond said, his phone buzzing with a text from Marcus. "My investigator is bringing the original crime scene documentation and a witness who can testify to evidence tampering. But we need to get that DNA tested immediately." Dr. Sarah Chin, one of the country's top forensic geneticists, leaned forward. "If you can get me those nail scrapings, I can have results in 6 hours. But I'll need a court order to access the evidence locker." Judge Patricia Beaumont, who owed Desmond a favor from a corporate case 3 years earlier, nodded grimly. "I can get you an emergency warrant. But you better have probable cause. We will by morning." At dawn on Sunday, 40 hours before Elijah's scheduled execution, Marcus and Thibodeau arrived at the Orleans Parish Evidence Facility with a court order and Dr. Chen's mobile lab. What they found there made Thibodeau curse in 3 languages. "The evidence locker for case 98 to 4471 has been sealed for 15 years. The clerk explained. "Detective Mouton's orders said it was contaminated and dangerous to handle." But when they opened the locker, the evidence bags were pristine. The nail scrapings Paul Thibodeau had carefully collected 15 years ago were exactly where he had expected them to be, perfectly preserved and ready for testing. "Son of a bitch," Thibodeau whispered. "They lied about contamination to keep anyone from testing this." Dr. Chen immediately began the extraction process while Marcus called Desmond with an update. "We've got the samples. But sir, there's something else. I ran a background check on Anthony Torino, the detective who handled Elijah's confession. What did you find? He died in a car accident 6 months after the trial. Single vehicle crash, very suspicious circumstances. And get this, his personnel file shows he was deeply in debt before the Castellano case, but his widow inherited a house in Florida and enough money to send their kids to private school." The puzzle pieces were forming a picture that made Desmond's stomach churn. The Torino family had systematically eliminated everyone who could expose their involvement in Vincent Castellano's finishing, everyone except Elijah Brooks, who they had successfully framed. By Sunday afternoon, Dr. Chen had her results. The DNA profile from under Castellano's fingernails was a perfect match to Salvatore, Sal, Torino, Vincent, Big Vinny, Torino's enforcer who had died of cancer 3 years earlier. The man who had actually finished Vincent Castellano had taken his secret to the grave. But the evidence didn't stop there. Cross-referencing the DNA against cold case databases revealed something even more shocking. Sal Torino's genetic material matched evidence from the Cleveland home invasion that had destroyed Desmond's childhood. "He's the one," Desmond whispered, staring at the lab results. "The man who broke into our house, who threatened my family, who made us run, he finished Vincent Castellano too. And they let Elijah Brooks rot on death row for 15 years. With 24 hours until the execution, Desmond's legal team filed emergency appeals with every court that would listen. The DNA evidence was overwhelming, but the system moved slowly, and time was running out. At Riverside Correctional Facility, Elijah spent what he believed might be his last day on Earth holding Cinnamon. The old cat seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, rarely leaving his side during the extended visit the warden had allowed. "I ain't scared to die," Elijah told her softly. "But I'm scared of leaving you alone again. You've been the best friend a man could ask for." Cinnamon purred and pressed her head against his hand, as if trying to tell him that everything would be all right. Neither of them knew that 1,500 miles away, a team of lawyers was preparing to move heaven and earth to prove she was right. At 5:47 p.m. on Monday evening, 13 minutes before Elijah Brooks was scheduled to receive a lethal injection, Warden Mills received the call that would change everything. "This is Mr. Landry's office. The execution is stayed pending an emergency review of new evidence. Do not proceed." The warden's hands shook as she hung up the phone. In the death chamber, Elijah was already strapped to the gurney, 4 lines inserted, saying his final prayers. She rushed down the corridor, her footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. "Stop!" she called to the execution team. "Stop everything. We have a stay." Elijah's eyes opened, confusion replacing the peaceful acceptance he had found moments before. "Ma'am? Mr. Brooks, your execution has been stayed. New evidence has come to light." 3 hours earlier, Desmond had burst into Mr. Landry's office with Jennifer Walsh and a briefcase full of DNA evidence, witness statements, and proof of police corruption spanning 15 years. He, initially skeptical, had grown increasingly pale as the evidence mounted. "You're telling me we were about to execute an innocent man?" Mr. Landry had asked, staring at the DNA report. "We're telling you that Elijah Brooks was framed by a criminal organization that finished the real evidence and bought off the investigating officers," Jennifer replied. "The man who actually finished Vincent Castellano died 3 years ago, but his DNA doesn't lie." The press conference the next morning sent shockwaves through the criminal justice system. Desmond stood at the podium, flanked by his legal team and Paul Thibodeau, facing a room full of reporters and cameras broadcasting live to the nation. 15 years ago, Elijah Brooks became the victim of a conspiracy that reached from organized crime families to the very police officers sworn to protect justice. Desmond began. "Today, science and the truth have prevailed." The questions came fast and hard. How had Desmond become involved? What was his connection to the case? Why had he spent millions of his own money to save a stranger? Desmond's answer silenced the room. "When I was 8 years old, my family was attacked by members of the Torino crime organization. We were forced to flee our home and start over. During that attack, a stray tabby cat appeared and distracted our attackers long enough for me to escape and call for help. That cat saved my life." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. 27 years later, I saw that same cat on the news, held by a man about to die for a crime he didn't commit. Sometimes the universe puts you exactly where you need to be to do what's right." Within a week, the corruption scandal had exploded across Louisiana. Detective Ray Mouton was arrested at his Florida retirement home, his assets frozen pending investigation. The evidence revealed a web of payoffs, destroyed evidence, and witness intimidation that had allowed the Torino family to operate with impunity for decades. But the moment that mattered most to Desmond came on a sunny Thursday afternoon when he flew to Louisiana to meet Elijah Brooks face to face. They met in the visiting room where Elijah had said goodbye to Cinnamon just days before. Now the old tabby cat sat contentedly between them, purring as both men she had saved in different ways finally came together. "I don't know how to thank you," Elijah said, his voice still hoarse from crying when the cell door had opened for the last time. "You didn't know me from Adam, but you moved heaven and earth to save my life. You don't need to thank me," Desmond replied, gently stroking Cinnamon's fur. "This old girl here, she's the hero. She saved both our lives, just 27 years apart." Elijah smiled, the first genuine smile he had worn in 15 years. "She always was special. Found her as a kitten behind the auto shop where I worked. half dead, but with more fight in her than animals twice her size. What will you do now? Don't rightly know. Been locked up so long, world's probably changed more than I can imagine. But Mrs. Rodriguez says I can stay with her until I get back on my feet. And I got my Cinnamon back. That's more than I dared hope for. Desmond reached into his briefcase and pulled out an envelope. Consider this a small token of apology from a justice system that failed you. It's enough to buy a house, start over, whatever you want to do. Elijah stared at the check, then back at Desmond. This is too much, Mr. Hale. It's not nearly enough. But it's a start. 6 months later, Elijah Brooks opened Brooks Animal Rescue in a small building outside New Orleans, funded by the Hale Foundation. The shelter specialized in saving abandoned cats, and its first resident was a 16-year-old tabby named Cinnamon who had somehow managed to save 2 lives and expose a conspiracy that had corrupted justice for more than a decade. On the wall of the shelter hung a simple plaque. Sometimes the smallest acts of love can change everything. Every evening, Elijah would sit with Cinnamon on the porch, watching the sunset and marveling at the strange paths that had brought them back together. She would purr contentedly in his lap, an old cat who had lived long enough to see justice finally served. And in Seattle, Desmond Hale slept peacefully for the first time in 27 years, knowing that the heroes who had saved his life were finally, truly safe.